You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday the 19th of December. BBC told to put more gay presenters on children's TV. Anti-Islamic fervour leads to hate crimes. Europe's most exotic city, that's a new name for a multicultural hellhole. Spain accused of act of war off Gibraltar. Pope suggests promoting gay unions harms justice and peace. Is Germany in the grip of its Nazi past once more? Viva la dictatorships worldwide, courtesy of Obama. Syrian warplanes bomb Palestinian refugee camp. Cedar Lake, Indiana, spared violent massacre. Thought for the day, aborting the not quite normal. And finally, the worm has turned for this angler. UK News. BBC have been told to put more gay presenters on children's TV to familiarise youngsters with different sexualities. BBC children's programmes should include more lesbian, gay and bisexual people, a report of the corporation recommends. A panel of 9 experts said that youngsters should be introduced to sexual diversity in their early years. Whilst there's been a gradual increase on the representation of these people, they remain still relatively invisible in the media, they said. The experts added that the BBC should be more creative and bolder in its depiction of such groups of people, taking care to steer clear of stereotypes, the report concluded. The LGB, lesbian, gay and bisexual, experts feel that the BBC should seek to incorporate the portrayal of LGB people within programming targeted at children, to familiarise audiences through incidental portrayal from an early age. A World at 8 reporter states, "Here we are again, the school of common purpose in all its glory. Everybody sees too much of the so-called alternative lifestyle. No one minds what people do in the privacy of their own homes and lives, but to have it aired to very young children at state level is very bad. It will, or indeed has become, the normal more than the alternative lifestyle." Anti-Islamic fervour leads to hate crimes. Britain is shedding the image that it is a land of tolerance and acceptance. The growing anti-Islamic fervour gripping the country has resulted in a number of incidents the police are investigating as hate crimes. Unfortunately, all the so-called incidents hardly qualify as a crime, let alone a hate crime. If Christians called the police about any of these things, they'd be laughed at. Bikir Mazar, an Islamic news site, reports recent attack on a home in the Bingham has once again thrown the battle of tolerance and acceptance versus hate to the forefront for Muslims in Britain. According to the BBC, graffiti was painted on a Muslim family's home after a ham cross was left on their doorstep recently. Police officials in London told BitKeerMazar.com the perpetrators should be charged with hate crimes. The offensive graffiti attacking Islam was painted on the family path last Saturday morning and has left Muslims across the UK worried about a rise in violence directed towards them. A World at 8 writer commented, "Well, you know what to do, don't you?" Europe's most exotic city. Portrayed as cold, wet and sometimes insular place, Manchester is actually one of the most exotic cities in the world, researchers claim. This is due to its cultural diversity, with at least 153 languages spoken. 2/3 of Mancunian school children are bilingual, with the number of languages likely to increase according to the study by Manchester University. The city is more diverse than London, and rivalled only by New York and Paris for its ethnic and linguistic mix, claims Professor Yaron Matras, who carried out the research. Manchester's language diversity is higher than many countries in the world, Professor Matras said. It is very likely to be top of the list in Europe, certainly when compared to other cities of its size. With a population of 500,000, Manchester is much smaller than London, where more than 300 languages are spoken by 8 million inhabitants. This presenter says, "I bet some people do not speak English at all in their homes, let alone be multilingual." Home Secretary warns of homegrown Anders Breivik-style attack. Theresa May revealed extra resources have been put into monitoring the risk from right-wing extremists, especially from a lone wolf fanatic. She said concern has grown in the wake of the Norway attacks in July last year, when Breivik slaughtered 77 people, mainly youth, at a Labour youth camp. The spread of violent right-wing anarchy amid the fallout of the Euro crisis, especially in Greece and Spain, has also increased fears, intelligence sources said. In evidence to the Commons Joint Committee on the National Security Strategy, Mrs May said, "We've had increased focus on right-wing groups in the last year or so, particularly since the Breivik incident in Norway. We've had more resources looking into right-wing extremism because it's still the case that we're likely to see a lone actor on the basis of the right-wing extremism." The World Today writer comments, "Well, you won't see any action at all from the Marxist liberal left, even when we're bulging at the seams with mosques and Sharia law, so she is stating the obvious here." European news. Spain was accused of an act of war after its naval ships repeatedly entered the territorial waters of Gibraltar. Bob Stewart, Tory MP for Beckenham, said the British government needed to respond robustly to this aggravation after Commons leader Andrew Lansley said 2 Spanish naval vessels entered the waters of Gibraltar on Monday. He said they were given radio warnings before leaving, but Mr Stewart, a former colonel, said the incursion was illegal and the government needed to do something about it. Pontiff says threats may destabilise marriage. Vatican City. Pope Benedict XVI has suggested that attempts to give gay unions the same status as marriages between men and women pose a threat to justice and peace. There is also a need to acknowledge and promote the natural structure of marriage as the union of a man and a woman in the face of attempts to make it judicially equivalent to radically different types of union, the Pope said in his message for World Day of Peace 2013, which was presented by the Holy See on Friday. Such attempts to actually harm and help destabilise marriage, obscuring its specific nature and its indispensable role to society. These principles are not truths of faith, nor are they simply a corollary of the right to religious freedom. They are inscribed in human nature itself, accessible to reason and thus common to all humanity. Is Germany in the grip of its Nazi past once more? News magazine Der Spiegel's astonishing condemnation of its own country. Quote, "After decades of trying to shake off the shadow of Hitler, fears are growing that Germany is once more embracing the Third Reich and all that entails. The far right continues to attract young recruits in its message of racism and arrogance." A nationalist spokesperson states, Der Spiegel is the propaganda arm of the EU elites. This article is the straw man argument designed to elicit a fear and flight response, so people's ears will be closed to a more conservative message. Any growth in the neo-Nazi movement is a direct result of the liberal elitists' mass immigration policies. The fight against the right wing, quoting a German standard phrase, Kampf gegen rechts, takes more and more drastic forms. After Sweden's Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt had declared mass immigration to be a punishment for the voters of the conservative Sweden Democrats, a Social Democrat newspaper published this week a shocking headline where the Sweden Democrats' president is depicted as a cockroach to be gassed by other parties. The Sweden Democrats, according to recent polls, stood at more than 12% voter approval, thereby the third Swedish party, are again and again the target of politically motivated violence. At regular intervals the apartments of their activists are being destroyed, car windshields smashed, children of local politicians threatened. Last year a Sweden Democrat politician with Christian Assyrian roots, Isa, had a narrow escape from a murder attempt committed by Muslim immigrants. They threw stones against the politician's apartment, yelling "effing Christian, effing Sweden Democrat, come out." When Isa opened the door they thrashed him and one of them stabbed a knife into his stomach. Isa survived miraculously and then left the party. Again only last week a member, Jesper Hard of the Swedish Democrats' youth organisation, was thrashed by immigrants in the middle of the street. A World Today reporter comments, "So much for freedom of thought and Islam. If the EU and Europe doesn't realise this is the thin end of a very wide wedge, they're either stupid or blind." Greek villagers evade taxes, drive Ferraris. Greek tax inspectors who routinely find tax cheats in Greece said they were amazed at how brazen and widespread it was in the village of Arma, near Thebes. Inspectors said they found most of the residents driving around in super luxury cars, such as Ferraris and the Porsche Cayenne. The Greek reporter writes, they were examining 9 suspects for tax evasion and charged that one stole more than €1 million by not paying any value-added tax on goods he sold. 2 farmers presented fake invoices with net asset value of €2.5 million and €1.1 million. The inspectors were actually in the village looking for a woman who had faked over 100 invoices with a value of €4.1 million for potatoes and onions. She was getting VAT refunds on behalf of the other villagers. The officials say they suspect that some €9 to €10 million had been stolen by alleged tax cheats in the village. World news. Dictators all the way down. On a cold winter's day, 2 years later, Obama celebrated the fall of Mubarak by proclaiming that the people of Egypt have spoken, their voices have been heard, and Egypt will never be the same. Now 1 year later, in the teeth of another winter, an Islamist winter, Egypt seems very much the same. Obama pledged to create a new beginning by ending, in the name of democracy, the old policy of supporting dictators, only to inaugurate a brand new policy of supporting dictators in the name of democracy. The ritual democratic elections led to the same place that they did in Iraq and the Palestinian Authority. And now Obama is forced to support a dictatorship in order to support democracy. The world may not rest on turtles or infinite universes, but the Middle East does rest on dictators, and no amount of new beginnings has changed that. Pull back one dictator and another pops up in his place. Hold elections, plan regime change, send in your activists or your warplanes, and when the dust settles and all the democracy dreamers are congratulating themselves on having pulled off a successful election, the new dictator steps out from behind the curtain to give his acceptance speech, impose martial law, and begin rounding up dissidents. A World Date commentator said, I suppose it's time for the Coptic Christians to pack their bags and head for the nearest exit. That is, if they're still allowed to keep their bags or any belongings they have, as the Muslims will confiscate everything, including their daughters, wives, houses, money, businesses, and where they object, their lives. They will not be welcome in the West as they are not Muslim, and the West will turn a blind eye to their incipient or actual slaughter. I hope I'm not wrong, but I do not think so, as this tragedy will spread all over the newly liberated Muslim nations. After all, it's free money, plunder, rape and theft, something the Muslims are somewhat expert at. Syrian warplanes bomb Palestinian refugee camp. Syrian warplanes bombarded Yarmouk, Palestinian refugee camp in southern Damascus, for the second time this week. Warplanes have also bombarded the nearby districts of Al-Hajjar and Al-Aswad and Asali, scene of intense fighting between troops and rebels. Yarmouk, established in 1957, is home to over 150,000 Palestinians and is considered by many the unofficial capital of the Palestinian refugee diaspora. So their dirty little secret is out. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been living in filthy refugee camps in Syria, Lebanon and Jordan for decades. They're not permitted to become citizens or own land in these countries. A World Date spokesman states, so much for the Brotherhood of Islam. The Muslims only use the Palestinian crusade when they need them to justify acts of violence against the Israelis. Other than that, as previously stated in World Date, they are the pariahs of the Muslim world. Cedar Lake, Indiana spared a violent massacre. An Indiana man with 47 guns and stocks of ammunition was arrested after threatening to go into a local elementary school and kill as many people as he could before police could stop him. Von Meyer, 60, was arrested on Friday after his wife called Cedar Lake police after he threatened to set her on fire and continue his violent spree by attacking a nearby elementary school. The loaded threat came the same day that a young man killed 20 children and 7 others in Newtown, Connecticut. Von Meyer was known to be a member of the Invaders motorcycle gang, though his role in the group was unclear. Like the notorious Hells Angels, the Invaders motorcycle gang is also considered an outlaw group. Genius tech geek to heartless killer. How did ticking time bomb and Adam Lanza go from genius tech geek, who grew up in a $1.6 million home, to become a heartless killer? Crazed killer Adam Lanza was a ticking time bomb who suffered from Asperger's syndrome and was painfully shy and awkward, former classmates said yesterday. A troubling portrait is beginning to emerge of the goth loner who dressed all in black and was obsessed with video games. Others say Lanza used to be a mild-mannered student in high school, making the honour roll and living with his mother, Nancy Lanza, who in turn loved playing dice games and decorating their upscale home for the holidays. Thought for the day: aborting the not-so-normal. Well, my friends, I'm sitting here today trying to look at my PC with my left eye healing from a cyst and my right eye with a rather nasty looking bulge on my right eyeball, which I'm having looked at further at hospital tomorrow. So the idea of not looking quite right or normal is of course looking straight back at me now. All I need is an eye patch and a sodding parrot, and there we have it, hey ho me hearties. Now there's been a bit of a brouhaha over the UKIP candidate who has been suspended by the party after calling for the compulsory abortion of all unborn babies with Down syndrome or spina bifida. Geoffrey Clark, who is hoping to win a seat on Kent County Council, wrote on his website that babies with such disabilities would be a burden if born. Disability charity MenCap branded Geoffrey Clark's comments abhorrent. In his personal manifesto, Mr Clark, who is also standing for Gravesham Borough Council in the by-election on Thursday, called for a government review into NHS expenditure. Now there is an article on the BNP main website which I haven't seen yet, but these are my thoughts, not necessarily my party's thoughts. We have two scenarios here that apply to different mindsets and possibly two different countries. My own personal thoughts are that if I had to make a choice over giving birth to a possibly challenged child, as we now have to put it, or in real terms a retarded child or a Down syndrome child, I would have the abortion. I had my children very young, but even then I had no patience with the normal lovely children like mine, let alone a challenged child. I simply could not do it. I had a near miss with thalidomide and my firstborn, so I'm grateful to God and my awful pregnancy sickness that I did not give birth to a child with flippers. So my answer is simple. However, in the UK today, we have people looking at this problem from two different perspectives. One of an England that existed many years ago, and according to them, still does. Of Indigenous people being looked after and in charge of their own lives, an NHS service not seriously undermined, underfunded and overrun, massive immigration drastically altering the face of Britain never having occurred, and our financial status as a country as it was before the EU, foreign aid, the Labour government selling off our gold and the global financial crisis well into the future. Now put that with a good government that looks after its people, and this scenario is near enough to the early 1960s. Not perfect, but bearable. Now, in those times, people still had family doctors, and these poor little unfortunates quite often did not survive birth, for whatever reason. There were no tests, I believe, then, hence the awful thalidomide tragedy, so it was sod's law and a matter of chance. Now in this climate, bearing in mind our NHS was stable and living was cheaper, if one had had the choice, I would say, if you can rear, look after and provide for a challenged child when you're dead, whether that be mental or physical, it's your choice and your family's. If you feel able and want a child like that, go ahead. However, we are not living in a country or a world like that anymore. On the TV last night there was an item on the mentally and physically disabled and the treatment they receive from the public. Apparently the public attitude has not improved even since the Paralympics, which was thought to be a flagship for the betterment and understanding of disabled people, and it has proved not the case. Now the reason for this is also multiple. One of which is that the population of this country seems to be giving over to immigrants from the third world, and their attitude is generally not good on the disabled or challenged front. Then we have the liberal left who promote anything not normal, and this encompasses people who look odd as being the norm in society. However hard they try, with the exception of ex-soldiers with obvious and terrible wounds, most of us look away if we see someone who is disfigured, physically awry or obviously mentally deficient. It's cruel, but it's true. The sad fact is that most of us do not view the physically disabled athletes, although brave and gutsy, as being superhuman or a condition we want to aspire to. This is right, because why should someone who is thankfully reasonably physically normal want to look otherwise? Only in a totalitarian dream state would that even be considered, and that is only to dumb down a nation physically and of course financially. In short, a progressive dream. We are all one colour, one shape, one sex and one thought. Ghastly in the extreme. Now, although I applauded the Para Games, I didn't watch them. Why? Because I didn't want to see these brave people and still do not, and that is my prerogative. Now we have the case of Britain now. Whereas I believe that Geoffrey Clark has brought up the impossible to say item, I'm glad he did. It needed saying, and especially in the UK today. It is tough to tell our own people to compulsorily abort less than perfect fetuses when our social services and NHS have to pay for the immigrants' less than perfect results of intermarriage without a murmur, for fear of being racist. But we live in a country that is groaning under the weight of overpopulation, diminishing countryside, no jobs, and successive governments who do not feed the needs of their own people and indeed early immigrants in this land. So Mr Clark has stated the obvious, that we are heading for the multicultural state that will abort preferably its own indigenous challenged babies. But where does that place the immigrants and their huge births? If a Pakistani woman has a test and it shows her child will be less than perfect, will she be forced to abort under what will be the new birth laws, or will she refuse and claim her human rights to offspring however maimed? Indeed, will all immigrant mothers be forced to take a test anyway, or is it just for the mothers who have a genetic disposition to challenged babies? It is a minefield in the UK today and will attract all the extremists from every camp. Those who do not think abortion should be performed on anyone even to save a life, to those who think that challenged children are a gift and should be encouraged as a norm. Where does social services stand on this one? They're so keen to remove normal white children from suspect homes. What will they do if a challenged child needs removing? Where to? And who would look after it? There are varying degrees of challenged, of course. The IT guy who has Asperger's was not challenged enough not to have the street cred to hack into an FBI website, and certainly there are higher functioning Aspergers living normal lives and also being heftily subsidised by our taxes to do so. In fact, I know of one who has produced 3 children, all with Asperger's, who do not work and live off extra state benefits. However, Asperger's is not spotted in the womb, whereas seriously disabled children and certain degrees of Down syndrome are. I think it is wrong for a people who allow abortion on demand for our young girls, no matter how dim or promiscuous in some cases they might be, and do not allow normal white children to be given the chance of life, to promote yet more abortions. Admittedly, not all these challenged will be Stephen Hawking, and most will be a drain on the economy, their parents and relatives for the rest of their lives. The reason why these tests were invented was to prevent the birth of challenged and deformed babies, but the choice should still lie with the mother. On one side there are many challenged people who need that money that would normally be spent on keeping some of these little souls alive, those who have incurred injuries when young or adult, children with conditions that arise when already in the world, like severe deafness or blindness, severely mentally disabled children who will never be rehabilitated into the normal world. These are all conditions that these tests cannot foresee, and all are worthy of caring for. My reasoning is that if civilization has allowed these tests to be carried out, then we should take advantage of them and use them. State or NHS-driven compulsory abortion is not a desirable course for a civilised society to take. However, if we continue in the UK and Europe to accept millions of strangers every year into our countries, we will have to pay the price if we want to survive. Our society, our governments and all our services we have taken for granted for so long will have to undergo tremendous change. As I say, you'll either have to think like the left, which wants overcrowded countries, full of every ethnicity and human state and condition, very little money for anyone, food shortages and virtually a run-down education and health system that they can manipulate to make the people believe they want it, or the right way of thinking, looking after one's own country and land and people, often to the detriment of other ethnic peoples, putting money back into the country, not outside it, loyalty to the state and loyalty to your culture and religion. Again, it is a matter of choices. A final choice could be that you are the voters, and if in the future our government were to bring in a law that all people should have a tax review every year, and that say £1,000 be put on every person working, which would pay for the future birth and caring of babies who would be severely mentally and physically challenged when born, just how would you vote? And finally, an angler disbarred from fishing competitions due to wrong bait. We've heard it all now at World at 8. Paul Newell, 57, who's been fishing at Tunnel Barn Fishery in Redditch, Warwickshire for the last 16 years, has been banned. Paul, a prolific angler, has been forced out after complaints from bitter rivals that his unique bait was blowing them out of the water in competitions. So now he and his bread-based bait are banned from future contests at the lake. So-called fellow fisherman claimed his bait gave him an unfair advantage as his bait did not sink, which apparently led him to winning most of the prize money on offer at the events held most weekends. According to local rules, Mr Newell's concoction of mashed up loaves of soggy white bread is allowed as it sinks in the water and doesn't float on the surface. Paul had a success rate of 50%, which forced other anglers to fish elsewhere. Mr Newell claims he has been ostracised and is boycotting the lake in protest. Now, as this presenter sees it, they're being typically British. If someone has a better and more successful method of fishing than you, keep him and that method, you'll get more fish. He is more than open on his mixture of bait, so why all the nastiness? Well, the ugly god of money, Mammon, rears his head once more. But better results are better than cutting off your nose to spite your face, aren't they? Is this the land of stupids? Share the prize money. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynne Mozart, partially blind, fed up, and I wish you all a very good night. The worm has turned for this angler. UK News. BBC have been told to put more gay presenters on children's TV to familiarise youngsters with different sexualities. BBC children's programmes should include more lesbian, gay and bisexual people, a report of the corporation recommends. A panel of 9 experts said that youngsters should be introduced to sexual diversity in their early years. Whilst there's been a gradual increase on the representation of these people, they remain still relatively.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozart. The World at 8. The number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday the 19th of December. BBC told to put more gay presenters on children's TV. Anti-Islamic fervour leads to hate crimes. Europe's most exotic city, that's a new name for a multicultural hellhole. Spain accused of act of war off Gibraltar. Pope suggests promoting gay unions harms justice and peace. Is Germany in the grip of its Nazi past once more? Viva la dictatorships worldwide, courtesy of Obama. Syrian warplanes bomb Palestinian refugee camp. Cedar Lake, Indiana, spared violent massacre. Thought for the day, aborting the not quite normal. And finally, the invisible in the media, they said. The experts added that the BBC should be more creative and bolder in its depiction of such groups of people, taking care to steer clear of stereotypes, the report concluded. The LGB, lesbian, gay and bisexual, experts feel that the BBC should seek to incorporate the portrayal of LGB people within programming targeted at children, to familiarise audiences through incidental portrayal from an early age. A World Date reporter states, "Here we are again, the school of common purpose in all its glory. Everybody sees too much of the so-called alternative lifestyle. No one minds what people do in the privacy of their own homes and lives, but to have it aired to very young children at state level is very bad. It will, or indeed has become, the normal more than the alternative lifestyle." Anti-Islamic fervour leads to hate crimes. Britain is shedding the image that it is a land of tolerance and acceptance. The growing anti-Islamic fervour gripping the country has resulted in a number of incidents the police